Hello and welcome to Linguist Collective Conference and International Mother Language Day celebration, organised by Interpreting and Translation Linguist Collective Agency. My name is Samina Kiani and I'm your host. I'm a broadcast journalist and media trainer, and it's an absolute privilege for me to be here today with you all, not just our speakers, but everybody who is here in the audience too. So I, like many of you, I'm multilingual and I'm super curious about the evolution of language. And I'm passionate about learning languages too. And I know this is going to be an incredible education for me today. So I'm really looking forward to it. So as I mentioned earlier, we are an international group. We've got people joining us from all around the world, which is super exciting. And we're all here for one thing, to honor the beauty and significance of language, the foundation of communication and connection. So before we get things underway, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to share with you. This event is being recorded for promotional and training purposes. And whilst we have an incredibly exciting lineup of speakers ahead, feel free to step away in case of emergencies. There won't be any official breaks. So grab some water, cup of tea, and settle in for an engaging event. Now, if you'd like to pose a question to one of our speakers throughout the event, then you can do that by submitting it via the form on Question Corner on the Linguist website, Linguist Collective website. And I believe, yes, there you are. You can see it there. Conference.linguistcollective.info. There's a tab at the top of the page which says Question Corner, and you can fill out that for whoever the relevant speaker is and submit that. So this year, LC Agency are celebrating International Mother Language Day with 3 events throughout the day, not just one. How fortunate are we? We've got 3 dotted throughout the day. And you're welcome to attend them all. So let me run you through the order of the day. We're starting now with best practices for communicating through an interpreter. And next at 1 p.m. GMT, we'll delve into rare and dying languages of the world, directly followed by multilingual education, the foundation of learning and intergenerational learning. And at 7:30 p.m. GMTV, we'll conclude with the highly topical subject that draws as much controversy as it does curiosity and excitement: artificial intelligence. Yes, AI and the future of linguistics is set to be a very compelling discussion. Our inspiring lineup of international speakers will provide insights and spark discussions on these vital language-related subjects. Now, the views and opinions expressed in this event are those of the speakers only and don't necessarily reflect the views or position of Linguist Collective. Before I introduce our first guest, I'd like to invite you to get connected with LC Agency across the company's social media platforms, and you can find details of this on the resources page on the website, and you can see the details there. You can also get connected via phone call, email, and a whole multitude of ways to get connected with LC Agency. So I invite you to do that. You can take a screenshot of that now if you want. Now, interpreters have been essential since ancient times, facilitating communication between different communities and kingdoms during trade. In the modern era, despite advanced technology, interpreters remain crucial. Globalization has intensified the need for understanding between nations, underscoring the importance of skilled interpreters. From social services and the judiciary to brands and governments, interpreters enable effective communication to convey messages accurately across languages. This gives me a great segue to introduce our first guest. She's a highly experienced lawyer linguist, non-practicing, and that's because she's got new endeavors underway and under her belt. She'll speak on the best practices for communicating through an interpreter, emphasizing interpreter value and timely material provision. Welcome, Sue Leschen.
Thank you very much for the invitation to today's event. It's a great honor for me to be here. Best practices for communicating through an interpreter. And this is in no particular order, and I'm going to have to speak fairly fast because we've only got a few minutes each to speak. So bear with me. As has been mentioned, I'm a lawyer linguist, non-practicing lawyer. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, and also of the Chartered Institute of Linguists in the UK. And I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Linguists Interpreting Division Steering Group. I'm a member of the National Register of Public Service Interpreters, of the Association of Interpreters and Translators, both in the UK, and also of the International Association of Professional Translators and Interpreters. I sit on a Sign Language Interpreters Professional Conduct Committee for an organisation in the UK called the National Registers of Communication Professionals working with deaf and deafblind people. I have Chartered Linguist Interpreter status, and I have my own company based in the northwest of England called Avocat, Legal and Business French Interpreting and Translation. I'm an independent trainer, mainly in the areas of legal terminology and increasing the lots of mentees for the Chartered Institute of Linguist Diploma in Public Service Interpreting Law exam. I do a lot of one-to-one, mainly online business mentoring for new and practicing language professionals. So I can help you, for example, prepare your terms and conditions of business. Basically, what we're looking for as interpreters from our clients is an interpreter-friendly approach. That's not to say we always get it. Sometimes we do have clients from hell. These are to be avoided. And I think the message that we want to get out there to clients is we want good quality clients who will pay us, and that means pay us on time and pay us reasonable remuneration, stay with us, be loyal, and also, of course, refer us. So we want to be recognized as valuable assets who can facilitate communication. What a lot of people don't realize is, and some clients don't realize, to be honest, that without us, they are unable to communicate. We want to be respected. We want to be considered to be business partners. We want to be considered to be equals. We want to be working together with clients on a level business playing field. The reality, unfortunately, is often that we have a sort of David and Goliath situation where power is concentrated in the hands of the client. What we want from clients really in order to facilitate our roles as communicators is proper job descriptions up front. We need to know what the timings are, what sort of duties are expected of us, which kind of skills are required, and so on. We don't need this halfway through the job or even after the job's finished when there's a dispute. We need it well in advance. So really, it's a question of negotiating terms and conditions up front as to all manner of issues. And I think that this doesn't always happen, unfortunately. I do believe that negotiation should be equal. I quite like this approach, though, the art of letting the other side have it your way. I'm joking there, but negotiation should really involve we get something out of negotiation and we give something. We want to be respected as skilled, qualified, insured, security vetted, and experienced communication professionals. Hopefully, most of us out there have got good professional indemnity insurance. We are security vetted to a reasonable level. For example, in the UK, disclosure and barring service enhanced certificates. Some of us who work in more sensitive areas have higher levels of security, for example, counter-terrorist checks and also security checks. So really what we're offering and what we want to be considered to be is professional individuals. We are, some of us experts, some of us are specialists. We are highly competent. We have good reputations. We are reliable. We have knowledge. We have qualifications. We are not machines. Just because something goes in there, it doesn't necessarily come out automatically from the other ear. We need preparation and all the rest of it. We also need regular and frequent rest and comfort breaks. Only yesterday, I was working online with the client on a 2-hour assignment, and I was actually being told that there would be no breaks because it was only for 2 hours. To which I said, sorry, no way, Jose. You know, I need a break towards the end of the first hour at the very least. And when I said that the longer I'm online, the more the risk is that there could be errors, that was what seemed to convince him. So I did get my break, 5 minutes, but it was better than nothing. Otherwise, we're going to end up like this, you know, depending on what our personal and professional other circumstances are. And this is not a good state to be in. So we want provision promptly of all relevant materials that we need in order to properly prepare for assignments. We don't need them the night before at midnight, or as happened to me on one assignment not long ago. It was an all-day assignment, a business interpreting job actually, and I was getting materials for the afternoon speakers during lunch. So when I was expected to eat and relax, I have no idea. So what we should be doing as interpreters, frankly, is saying to clients, you know, we want the materials by, say, noon on the 21st, failing which we either will be withdrawing from the assignment, or if we do go ahead, the client must realize that we are not properly prepared and that there is a risk to that. There's a risk to the client. And, you know, actually for us interpreters, there's a risk, isn't there, for our reputations as well. Because many sessions are now increasingly recorded, and if we're not performing correctly because we haven't been properly prepared, then our reputations are seriously endangered. I always say to my mentees, you know, a good interpreter is a prepared interpreter. I can think of a case where I was interpreting on a business compensation matter in court, and it was all to do with a broken conveyor belt. I didn't even understand the terminology, the technical stuff in English, let alone in French. And I'd begged the lawyers up front for that beforehand. I'd been promised it and it didn't arrive. So I spent most of the hearing asking the barristers, can you please explain this and explain that? And the judge actually was really sympathetic to me and criticized the barristers. You know, if there are going to be PowerPoints and YouTube videos and so on, we need to see them up front. If there are website details that could be helpful, we need those. So basically, we should not be in a situation where there are resources available to us, but we're not being given them. And the sort of common excuse is, oh, it's confidential. We can't, you know, give them up front, you know, because they're just for the client won't release them and all this sort of thing. But, you know, I think we all old enough and wise enough now to know that there are secure online portals, and, you know, we could be being given this information. We want prompt remuneration because we too have bills to pay. 60 days is rubbish. 30 days, certainly in the UK, is good business practice. Sooner if you can get it. Deposits are good. Translators have got a history, as far as I'm aware, in the UK, of getting deposits up front, and I think a lot more interpreters are doing that now where we're working privately. 50% is good. If you can get 100% up front, and I know some colleagues are now going down that route, that's even better, especially where you don't know the client, and it's a bit of a risk if you work for them and then they can't pay. So we want to get all that sorted well in advance. We want fair remuneration practices, because if we haven't got those, we simply can't pay our bills. We're not monkeys. We're not working for peanuts. Time is money, and a lot of us get very fed up with being asked to do extra half an hours, or to start to log on, you know, 20 minutes in advance of an online session, completely unpaid. Why should we? You know, it's you know, it's a freebie basically for the client. If I added up how many times in a week I'm expected to work for free, it would be several hours actually. So I think we need to really get over that. We're business people. We're running businesses, not charities. Just to alert you to an event tomorrow that I'm presenting on behalf of the Chartered Institute of Linguists, called Time is Money, very appropriate. It's a focus session. It's really interactive. I know we've got a few places left. It's only, I think, £35 sterling, 1.5 hours. So please come and work out how we can best use time and get paid for it. So I think we need to put out there an understanding of what interpreters do and actually what we don't do. We're not friends. We're not allowed to give opinions and so on. This is a big bugbear that we're constantly being mixed up, of course, with translators. Although sometimes it's worse than that. You know, we can be signed up for an interpreting job and then actually been asked to, in the middle of it at some point, do a translation as well. You know, why should we? We haven't been booked to do that. I think it's really important that it's realized that there are things that we cannot and should not be doing because of our codes of practice and ethics. You know, we are not allowed to give our opinion on whether we think the client comes from Iran or Sudan or whatever, or whether we think they're lying or they're not. You know, most of us have signed up, like myself, to professional organizations, membership organizations, National Register of Public Service Interpreters, and so on, all of whom have robust codes of conduct that we professional interpreters abide by. We want detailed instructions about subject matter up front, because the job could be about this, or it could be about money laundering, or it could be emotionally sensitive, traumatic, maybe for personal reasons we don't want to go there. We want to know where we're working, if it's a large building, where in the building, in case we get lost, run out of time. Is there parking there? You know, all these kind of basic considerations. Is it on the phone? Is it anywhere? Can we do the job from anywhere? If you're a bit of a digital nomad, I mean, I know this is increasing. Sound of the sea might be an issue. Is it a court? Is it a Crown Court? Here it is, clearly, because we've got a jury. Need to know, is it remote interpreting in the same building but in another room, or is it remote interpreting from a completely different destination? Which sort of language or languages and language directions are appropriate for this job? Is it, for example, for me, mainline metropolitan French, or is it so-called African French? African French is often being asked for those of us who work with asylum seekers and refugees, and actually it means that, you know, you're very familiar with Congolese culture and so on, and Cameroon culture. African French doesn't really exist, but agencies don't really know that. Who's going to be there? Child as a client, maybe, in which case things can change dramatically in terms of your language, your dress code, all sorts of things. Might there be a delegate from the French office? Might there be other interpreters because you've got a partner interpreter, or there are other languages? Need to know. Might you have a deaf client who may need foreign language interpreting? We need to know information about assignments that are incredibly specialized. I mean, maybe it's to do with nuclear power, for example, very, very particular terminology. It could be a niche market event. For example, London Fashion Week is on the go at the moment. You know, I've got colleagues who interpret in fashion. I wouldn't have a clue, although I like fashion, but you know, it's about picking the right interpreter, having a good match for the job. You know, are you wanting a sort of generalist or a skilled interpreter? Well, I mean, I would hope they were skilled. Specialists, okay, they do a bit of dabbling in this area, or really do you want somebody highly expert, experienced in this area? What about timings? We need to be really specific. Are we talking about GMT or Central European time, start and finish times? I mean, basic information, but you'd be surprised how often we're not told these things. When are the break times? When are the refreshment times? Are we going to be able to eat, or do we have to work through to help clients understand each other when they're eating? Is it out of hours at any point? What do we consider to be out of hours? We want to be paid for tech tests. Increasingly, they're not paid, unfortunately, but we want to test out audio and video issues and any background noise, like speakers eating or whatever next to the mic. And we want to be paid for this time, because tests can run for half an hour sometimes or more. Equipment, who's providing it, us or the client? When we get there, are we going to be using a tour guide system? Headphones, who's going to provide them? Portable or on-site booths, etc. Some clients may specify which type of headphones. Finally, now on to non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. They've got to be reasonable. in time. You know, we must not be allowed to not work for a client for, say, the next 6 years. It's too long. Place, we must be allowed to work in the Greater London area, you know, within the next year or two. Longer than that is unreasonable. Big bugbear. It's very difficult to comply with an instruction to destroy all of the client's materials. How on earth do we do that?
Sue,
Most of it's there.
forgive my interruption. We are out of time now.
I
So
bet we
I was
are.
wondering if you could just give it a wrap up so
Yep.
that we can keep to schedule.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, that's really interesting to hear. Thank you so much for sharing,
You're welcome.
you know, the impacts on interpreters and some of the solutions that could be put forward for this. That was really, really clear as to what kind of environment you want to create in each workspace. So now we have joining us the event chair, Lynn Townley, Barrister Lynn Townley. Hello and welcome. It's great to have you here.
Hello, Samina. I'm very happy to be here and very much looking forward to the events of the day. And just hearing the last speaker, Sue, really good advice for anyone wanting to start down the route of interpreting, because there's a lot of things that you need to look at, logistics and so on, that people overlook. So really great speaker to start the day.
Thank you, Lynn. And of course, we'll be hearing from you a little bit later on. Really looking forward to it. Great to have you join us. So now I'd like to move on. I would like to introduce our next guest, who will speak on real-world challenges and solutions for professional interpreters. She's a multilingual interpreter and translator with over 2 decades of experience across court, tribunal, immigration, and police interpreting assignments. Welcome, Dr. Andrea.
Good morning, everybody. Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to take part. I hardly ever do public speaking, first because I'm very shy. Secondly, I work in a small area, which is Hungarian. And when I teach or help or assist people, I like to help them with linguistic technicalities, because I've got rather a lot of experience and learning in both languages. And I'm always a little bit wary of talking about generalities that most of us know and which are sort of blanket issues. However, I've got a few things together which still make me think when I interpret after all these years of experience. First of all, these mostly practical matters I'm going to focus on. First of all, the importance of introduction. There are agencies that expect feedback from the clients, and one of them, for example, expects the client to tick whether you've introduced yourself or not. Ever since I came across this, I've been focusing on introducing myself, introducing the Hungarian speaker, limited English speaker, if I'm in that environment. It is great help. It sets up a report. So most of the time, 99% of the time, we will not be in hell, because just that kind introduction, I'm talking about primarily health setting, social setting, will create a sort of rapport which will allow people to communicate on nice human terms. So that's one thing I would like to bring to attention. Immigration settings, because these are the 2 things I've been asked to focus on, immigration and health, different matter. Immigration, we have to be formal. I don't know how many interpreters we have here who work in immigration settings. A lot of them will know that judges are very, very sensitive about comments, small talk, chats. So if one is there for the tribunal, one is there for the tribunal. One cannot be friendly, one cannot make small talks, one doesn't initiate introduction, but always someone else will. No comment, no chatting, because the issue is so sensitive that one cannot take sides in any way, even implicitly. So I'm not going to talk more about that. It's good to pay attention to that, because some of the judges are very sensitive about that, and they will warn. Now, I would rather stay at a social setting, health setting at the moment. We've got 2 ways at the moment, mostly, or 3: phone, remote, and face-to-face. So face-to-face, nice to create this report. I've heard that hint from Samina, that we've got that sort of interpreting that only interprets, you know. I'm here to interpret. I ask you where you come from. Sorry, my code of conduct forbids me to answer because I'm here to interpret. So I'm going to interpret what you say. Now, most of us who work in a health environment will know that the health staff usually are very friendly. They like to create a nice rapport with people, so they are not intimidated. They are not worried about what's going to happen next, especially when they have very serious conditions. So I feel over the years now, I've been working in health, and it's really nice to be friendly, not over friendly, not to talk, not to ask questions about people, you know, where you come from or how many children you have. They may not be able to have children, or, you know, whatever, but, you know, talk about the weather. You know, if they try and be friendly about car parking, it took me half an hour to park the car because the upper deck is closed, and, you know, there was mayhem in the car park, but we were all very good and we sorted out the mayhem, and I managed to get here on time. And if they want to talk to you, then talk to them. Don't suppose anything. Don't suppose from their name that they come from here or there or anything about their families, but try and create a nice conversational basis in the waiting room, because we usually spend time waiting. And it's nice to, I feel, nice to create a sort of nice rapport, a pleasant environment, human environment in which we can work. Now, when it comes to remote, we often come across the problem of very bad lines. You know, a line is crackling, I can hardly hear. If it's not a matter of life and death phone call, I will hang up. I will ask them, you know, it's impossible to work under these conditions. I can't be sure as to what I'm interpret, and matters are serious. So please try and phone again. Please try and sort out the line. When it's a matter of life and death, some of you may have not thought about this, beginners. Try and hold the line. So what I'm trying to do, I can roughly hear what someone says. I reiterate. I tell the client, sorry, I can hardly hear what the limited English speaker says, but if you can bear with me, I repeat it back to them in their own language and check whether that is what they have said. And I will work like that as long as we get to a stage that sort of the situation can be dealt with. So when it's a matter of an emergency call, I feel personally the last resort is to hang up. So you don't hang up. As long as you can manage the conversation with a fair amount of safety, so you are not going to gather something else than what they've said from the conversation, hold the line. Next step, let's say we established a nice communicational setting and off we go, we can interpret, which is the ideal world. The line is clear, everyone's clear, you can understand what people say. I still come across situations from old colleagues and from people who sort of step in to interpret whatever we think about that. Sometimes they do, sometimes there isn't an interpreter and they always interpret for mom. And they keep explaining the situation. Please don't. Sometimes there's a cultural gap. So people will not understand the term I'm using because it condenses rather a lot. Then I will paraphrase that term so it's clear what I'm saying, but I will not keep explaining the situation, because whether there's a doctor or whether there's a person conducting the interview, they will want to see that person. They know what they are looking for. They want to form their own picture. Next thing, I still have a problem after 20 plus years of interpreting, that I'm interpreting and suddenly I can't believe what I hear because it's completely out of context. It just doesn't fit in with anything what they said. Please interpret, because very rarely one catches out oneself. So I do something like a little cosmetic surgery. I sort of bend the interpretation in a way that it fits in with everything else. And after 2 rounds, I get caught out by myself. And it dawns on me that what I heard was incredible, but correct. And then I can get my razor out. Either during the interview or after the interview, I've got to approach the police officer and I have to say, sorry, sir, I could hardly believe that, but that's what they said. He didn't say that, but that's what they said. Actually happened to me. Since then, it hasn't happened to me. It happens to me about once a year. So be careful. If you really can't believe your ears, then confirm. Obviously, there's this problem, there's a flow of communication, which we don't want to interrupt. We want it to be natural. And there's the other problem of safeguarding, that what we interpret has to be right. So if there's a serious doubt, very serious doubt of what I hear, then I will stop the flow of communication and I will say that interpreter will need to clarify what's being said, because I'm not going to say I can hardly believe my ears, but interpreter is not quite clear about it. And then we can go on. So this is a problem I still come across. The other thing is when people haven't got the register of what you've got. In medicine in Hungarian, people are very well trained. Hungarian medical professionals are very well trained. They learn a lot of the anatomy in Latin. So you come across, I read a lot, many terms I've never heard in spoken Hungarian, what people use. I've learned a lot from people over the years, so very many terms I know now. However, people will often not be able to talk about their own health. So they will say things which doesn't exist. For example, pinched spine. We know there cannot be a pinched spine. Or they will say that they've got a cold from down below. We know there's no such thing because it's got to be an infection. So in these cases, in a health setting, I will have to stop the flow of communication. And I will point out to the doctors that people say these things, and these things are not medical terms, but this is how they say things. So this must be a pinched nerve in the vertebra or somewhere in the spine. So I will stop the flow of communication then. And then I'm going to have another problem apart from safeguarding, and that I want a proper flow of communication, and that is allowing people's character to come through. So doctors especially like to see the person they are dealing with. So I will not mock people or mimic people, because I wouldn't mock them anyway, but I wouldn't want my mimicking to be mocking. So I'm not going to mock or mimic their style. I'm going to be sort of formal. But in a health setting or social setting, I will very, very gently hint at their level of language use. So if it's very incoherent, I will at some point very modestly, quietly point out that I'm using my razor to make those sentences coherent. I never want to criticize people, but I will ask them very politely and nicely to try and be clear to me as much as possible so I can do the best interpretation for them. This is where I feel you always balance, and still to the present day, I watch my tone, I watch my tongue, so I don't possibly hurt or offend anyone, but I give a very good overall picture of what's going on. One more thing, because I know we are limited by time, and that's when I know a patient's history. When I know a patient's history and that patient is a very bad communicator and got lots of ailments, I'm going to stop. I'm going to tell the doctor that I know the history as an interpreter, and I will ask the doctor to allow me to ask the patient to give me permission to tell the doctor all the history. And then I'm going to summarize the history, and I will tell the patient I've summarized the history. And I feel that's a very good solution, rather than wasting time and multiplying confusion or not letting the doctor know about a very important things that are important for that person's care. So these are the main things that still sort of try me in spite of years of experience. And this is what I wanted to share. And there's one more thing, that we are not supposed to share our details or not supposed to personally help people as interpreters, because we work for the client. We are booked in formal settings, especially with the NHS. It's a very difficult one. I warn young interpreters. I've got into trouble very many times by being over helpful. It cannot be done, no matter that my heart is bleeding. What I can do, I can hold my little badge. You know, they can find me. They can find me through the register. They need help. So don't. It's a very, very difficult thing. And sometimes I feel terrible, you know, walk away from all that trouble, but don't.
Yeah. Andrea, that was really enlightening, and it just really showcased the need for clarity in communication. It's absolutely critical to avoid misunderstandings and the incorrect information being communicated. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you, Dr. Denby. Admired for the work that you do. Really appreciate it. Okay, so my pleasure. So at this point, I'd like to share with you a little bit about LC Agency. As an online agency and service-based marketplace, it's developed to provide comprehensive services and solutions, offering collaboration between professional linguists and institutions and companies. And as you will see right now, on screen, there is an array of services offered by LC Agency, everything from interpreting, translation, through to book publishing, subtitling, proofreading, forensics, and expert evidence, and more. Interpreting and Translation Linguist Collective operates on transparency, fairness, and integrity, ensuring all clients are given options and respect, and all linguists are fairly remunerated. The services offered, as you can see, are wide-ranging. And so, you know, I invite you to go take a deeper look on the website. Also, LC Agency offers hundreds of languages for interpretation and translation from highly skilled professionals and a 24/7-hour service. Of course, if there's a language that's not listed on the website, then you can call LC Agency or email them, and they will do their best to accommodate you. The company upholds high standards and will only provide the most professional linguists and interpreters. If you're interested in these services, or if you're an interpreter who'd like to work or collaborate with LC Agency, then you can get more information by sending your inquiry via an email or by picking up the phone. And you can find those details on the website, which is linguistcollective.info. Now, moving on to our next guest, a trailblazer in TikTok journalism and listed among the 25 most influential women in the UK by British Vogue in 2022. She's also co-host of the BBC World Service, Where to Be a Woman podcast, and she'll share fascinating insights into the dynamic intersection of language, technology, and social. Sophia Smith-Gaylor, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my work and my connection with languages, and really the kind of journey it's all taken me on, and what I think can really be valued when it comes to platforms like Instagram and TikTok, and how they can motivate lots more young people into wanting to learn languages and see a future with them. So I have worked for the BBC and I've worked for Vice News. I began my career at the BBC following not only a master's in broadcast journalism, but an undergraduate degree in Spanish and Arabic that I did at Durham. I actually grew up in a multilingual family because I'm half English, half Italian, and seeing my mum and my nonna speak to each other in Italian, but also their dialect in Northern Italy, which was only ever referred to growing up as il dialetto. And it's as a grown-up that I've done my own independent research on it, and I found it's Emilian. You know, it is its own language, but because of Italian politics and whatnot, it's called a dialect. And I was spoken to in these languages, but never expected to respond. So I grew up a bit of a receptive bilingual. And I thought, isn't it cool that my mum can speak all these languages? I want to do that, but I want to communicate with like half the globe when I do that. That's part of the reason why I picked Spanish and Arabic, because I could just speak to so many people around the world with those two languages. And I had the best time learning them. It was during my year abroad that I fell in love with journalism. I got to co-host a radio show in Beirut. And I also got to do work experience in Madrid with an English language newspaper. In journalism, it was quickly and clearly obvious that I was able to find stories, because I was multilingual, that my monolingual English counterparts in the newsroom were missing out on. One of those times was at the BBC. If you remember the very tragic explosion in Beirut that happened a couple of years ago, it was because I was able to speak Arabic that I went through social media posts and was the first reporter to cover a very kind of inspiring, incredible story of an altar that had been an explosion hitting a church and the altar remaining perfectly preserved. I was a religion reporter at the time and the first to find that story. It happened again a couple of years later when I became a senior news reporter at Vice News. I was the first English language reporter to identify a story that was going viral in Spanish press and bring that to global audiences. So time and time again, my languages have been really useful for my journalism career. There have been countless other times where I've been able to really quickly build rapport with someone, you know, in sort of breaking or unfolding news stories where the fact that, you know, I'm always really passionate about, you don't need to be fluent. You need to, it's about demonstrating a bit of respect and showing that, wow, you've made the effort to at least be conversational. And there are really like pressing moments where that can be the difference in winning someone's trust and like just demonstrating it. I think it's respect. Maybe there are other sort of words we can put on it. But that was all in my like journalism life. And I also straddle this other life, which is as a content creator. It was over 4 years ago now when TikTok first appeared on the scene. As a journalist, I had to use social media all the time anyway, but that tended to be Twitter at the time. And TikTok was blowing up and I thought, let me try making journalistic content on here, which I did. It was a bit spiky at the very beginning, telling or trying to convince a newsroom that, hey, TikTok is a journalistic platform. It can be a news source. You know, newsrooms don't like being challenged on that front because they like to think that they are the one sort of source for high quality information and content. It sounds ridiculous saying this now because obviously it's 4 years later now and we know so many people around the world get their news from these platforms, but at the time it was really hard to convince the newsroom. And I was told, oh, Sophia, no, you're not allowed to put your journalism on there. And I was like, oh, that's so annoying. Okay, fine. Well, I'll put something else on there. I'll put my love of languages on there. So I just started making loads of personal content and that went even more viral than my journalism content. So fast forward to now, I have over 500,000 TikTok followers. I have over 250,000 Instagram followers. A lot of that audience has been built from my journalism, but the vast majority of that audience has come to me for the content that I make around languages. Some of that content might be around my experience learning Spanish or Arabic, but that's the minority. The majority of my content is about sharing new research in language learning or linguistics, the psychology of language. I use my sort of journalistic experience writing science pieces for BBC Future to bring what I've built as the explainer format. I explain new developments, new research to audiences. I explain unfolding news stories in the language space. Yesterday, I made a video about how the Russian government is investigating Duolingo at the moment. And I know I get messages all the time from people who tell me that they're studying languages at university because they've been inspired by my work, which is the best reward to get from making that kind of content. And it's certainly not what I set out to do. I have one particular viral series, which is called etymology. So it's etymology, but with an A in there. Etymology, and it's all about the history of food words, you know, where we got different words for food in English and where they came from. That's been one of my most viral series to date, and my video about onions and the etymology of onions won me 100,000 new Instagram followers in the space of a week. So there is so much interest in these stories and these videos, and I really think that they can be mobilized to help create new language learners and people who can see the benefits of multilingualism if they haven't been made too obvious to them growing up, which my context growing up in the UK, sadly, you know, all the positives about multilingualism I heard directly from my multilingual immigrant family. I didn't really hear them from the education system or the like cultural conversation here. The last point that I'd love to make are just two things that I'm working on at the minute that might be of interest to viewers here. One of them is that, inspired by the work, the traction that my social media work was getting, I launched an Etsy store. I wanted to try and found sort of the world's first lifestyle brand for language learners and lovers. So less an educational space and more like a community of tools and journals for people who love languages to buy. And I am also an author, and the next project that I'm working on is about languages. I can't quite reveal what exactly, but I'm really passionate about languages in general, and I'm always very eager to connect with individuals working on interesting projects in this space. There is an emphasis certainly on endangered languages, like the one that my mum and my nonna speak to each other in. But I'm also interested in tools that are able to show off benefits of multilingualism and what they may have brought to a community. As a journalist and content creator, those themes really interest me. So yeah, just to say, I'm very eager to hear about those. And yeah, this month, the coolest thing has been that I have built what seems to be one of the first, if not the first, language learning calendar. It was a tool that I really wanted, and I Googled for it and it didn't exist. So I spent ages illustrating and designing one. And then I put it out in December, and it's been one of my best-selling products to date that I've made. And now if you type language learning calendar in on Google, it's the top result, because it was like, it's the only one that's there. So that's been a real joy to work on as well. And my ambition is to be able to get these calendars in schools. You know, I've made them for adults at the minute, but what would be a real joy is getting them in schools. So those are a couple of things that I'm working on, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have about content creation in this space, or sort of the marriage between multilingualism and journalism, Etsy store running. You know, I have this sort of weird mix of experiences, and I'm very happy to answer any questions about them. And I should say that this year I'm busy trying to revive my Arabic. It's not as good as it was when I graduated, so I'm trying to revive that. And I'm learning Italian, and I've seen like a huge improvement in my Italian this year, which has been really
great.
cool.
That's great, Sophia. That's really enlightening, and so exciting what you're doing. You're in such an exciting space, and congratulations on all those followers and the difference you're making to people. It's not just locally, it's around the globe. You know, when you are online, it's global. What I'm interested in is obviously the Emilian language, endangered. And we'll be talking about endangered languages later on today. And also reflecting on my own language learning journey. I'm multilingual like you. I grew up in a trilingual household, and, you know, didn't speak all the languages. I think you called it a receptive. Yeah. So I had a look at your etymology series, really, really cool. And it seemed to kind of align with the immersive experience approach that I had in terms of gaining fluency in French. Can you elaborate on the immersive approach and the storytelling contributes to language learning? Because I remember seeing one of your videos about the history of the word avocado. Yeah, really interesting.
I think I always refer back to the context I've grown up in, because I'm aware it's unique around the world. You know, it's an anomaly to only speak one language, but that is the case for us Brits most of the time.
Yeah.
It's weird because in the UK, we are fed and we indulge in a love of language in terms of a love and respect for English. You know, we're the home of Shakespeare. There's a lot of content that monolingual English speakers adore about language, but it's often only about English. And I'm confident that when we educate further about how our language was built, where we got different words, they're not all, you know, indigenous words, so to speak. I think that helps gradually sort of engender an appreciation and interest in multilingualism and respect for other languages and cultures. In terms of immersion, the tool that I've tried to develop for myself, and it's the one that I share with my audience, and they're welcome to just imitate, or they're welcome to like buy the blueprint of in my Etsy store. But like the Get Fluent With Me method that I have been using to learn Italian, it draws from my experience doing my degree when I had like really high quality language education, trying to implement that in a way cheaper way, but using, you know, the world's really different from a decade ago when I was at uni. Like, we didn't all have a Netflix subscription, stuff like that. How do you take advantage of your Netflix subscription to learn a language, for example. So you're not actually paying anything extra, but here are some useful tips to gradually introduce loads of Italian content into your weekly media diet, and build a world around you where you're making language contact all the time, and if not all the time, a lot of the time. So educating people on how we can use digital tools, social media tools to try and build up language contact time, and then doing good language methods around that to really ensure it gets in our heads.
Sophia, thank you so much for sharing that. And what I understood from that, it was creating an integrated approach to daily life around language to get fluency. Thank you so much. That was really interesting to hear. Thank you so much for your time. So at this point, I'd like to bring your attention to LC Agency and all the services that they offer, including forensic and expert evidence service. And the agency takes immense pride in introducing a groundbreaking and unparalleled service. This specialized offering is precisely designed to assist investigations by providing meticulous and systematic language analysis. You can get more information by contacting LC Agency and visiting linguistcollective.info, and you can see the contact details on screen now. Feel free to take a snapshot of that if you wish. Okay, it's time for our next speaker. I'd now like to introduce Executive Director at NRPSI, the UK's independent voluntary regulator of professional interpreters, specialising in public service. He'll speak of the current landscape of spoken language services within key public sector arenas. A very warm welcome, Mike Orlov.
Thank you ever so much. And what an honour it is to be here today. Now, I also have a stack of slides, so let's see how quickly we can get these up and ensure that we don't chew up too much time with administration, because we've got a lot of work to do in half an hour. There's a lot of ground to cover, and let's kick off. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to look at the current state of play of spoken language services in the main public sector arenas, and summarize what it is that we're really looking for to ensure that the public sector gets the best out of public service interpreting, that the public get the best out of public service interpreting, and indeed the professionals who deliver public service interpreting are also getting the best out of the world. Because as we know, we have some real disconnects right now in the UK, and we're working very hard to actually remove those disconnects and create a much better playing field for everybody involved in public service interpreting. Now, the way we're going to do this is spend a lot of time looking at the differences between how different public sector organisations deal with interpreting, because they're not all the same. And they've all been on different journeys to get to where they are today. And that's what we're going to spend the next half hour really focusing on. But before we do that, let's just remind ourselves what the National Register is not. It is not an agency that's out there looking to create business. There are many agencies operate in that area where they are the engagement agency working between the public sector and also individual public service interpreters. The National Register is not a union. It is very heavily involved in standards and ensuring standards are met. Where standards are slipping, then the National Register gets very involved, but it's not a union acting on behalf of members, nor is it an examining body. The National Register does not create examinations. Other organisations, which are very well qualified to create examinations under the regulatory arm of Ofwat, ensure that the examinations, which are vocational examinations for public service interpreting, are actually delivering what they should be delivering. That's not the National Register's job. Nor are we the regulator of examinations either. That's Ofwat's role. So what is it then that the National Register does? Well, there are approximately 400 professional bodies in the UK representing professionals, and there are different types of professional bodies. Sue mentioned some of them earlier today. She mentioned being a member of a learned institute, the Chartered Institute of Linguists. But the CIOL, and indeed the ITI, the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, acts on behalf of members driving professional standards. Then there are associations, such as the APCI, the Association of Police and Court Interpreters, or the AIT, the Association of Interpreters and Translators, or SOMI, Society of Official Metropolitan Interpreters. Again, these associations are there to act on behalf of members. And then there are regulatory bodies, some of which are statutory, the bulk of which, within PARN, with the Professional Associations Research Network, the bulk of regulatory bodies are actually independent and voluntary. And they check qualifying registrants. They check their qualifications, they check their experience, they check their clearances, the right to work in the UK. So the agreed professional standards. And that is exactly what the National Register is. The National Register of Public Service Interpreters is your regulator. When somebody carries the badge of NRPSI, you know that they have gained the right qualifications, that they have the right experience, that they've had their credentials and clearances checked, and the right to work already checked. And there's an ID card, and on the back of that ID card, there'll also be a QR code, which will take you straight to the register with their entry. So the National Register is there as a regulator, ensuring professional standards are met. Is public service interpreting an occupation or a profession? Well, serious professions need standards, and that's why we have to have a regulator. Occupation's about doing some work and earning some money to achieve it. A profession is much more than that. Profession's about not just earning money in a specific field, but actually fulfilling three essential pillars. So if you see yourself as a professional public service interpreter, you need to ensure that you've got a high degree of knowledge and expertise in that specific field, and that has been checked through qualifications and experience checks. That you continuously expand your knowledge and expertise, that you get involved in continuous development, as we are doing today, and that you are recognized and trusted through the independent accreditation of a professional regulator. That marks out a professional. So given NERPS's role, how have we been driving government and public sector organizations to actually get to a stage where standards are being met, the sort of standards that we in the profession wish to see? So the building blocks of doing that are looking at each government or organization, each public sector organization, understanding where they are and their appetite for the regulation of PSI. What's the actual situation that they're in today? What's the desired situation? And then how are we going to go about getting to where we want to be? So what we'll look at a little bit later today is how the particular organizations like the Ministry of Justice, the NHS and the police, how they've got to where they are today, and then where we're going to move from today into the future. So we, as an organization, need to understand each of those public sector organizations and do a gap analysis. What is it the public needs? What is it the public sector itself needs? What do professional public service interpreters need? Level 3 qualifications as well as level 6 qualifications, understanding how that's actually all working within our ecosystem. And through that, we'll have an understanding of what needs to be done, what resources we need to deploy, what people we need to get involved to ensure that we achieve those strategic objectives, which are protection of title, recognition of your status as public service interpreters through statutory recognition, ensuring that you have a mandate to work, and that mandate stretches all the way to the public sector organizations, so that they're only looking to engage with those people who are registered public service interpreters, and ensuring that remuneration is commensurate with your qualifications and with your experience in terms of conditions of fare. So that's the journey we need to go on. A profession has a governing body when the complexity of the service delivery has risk, which needs to be minimized and mitigated. If government doesn't see risk, then it won't move to get to statutory recognition and protection of title. If a public sector organisation doesn't see risk, it won't move. It needs to be moved and risk shown to them. Regulated professions ensure accountability of the professional service delivery by those who are registered and regulated. It protects standards. And we've been in a situation where standards have been dissolved like sugar cubes in hot tea over a decade or more. And we have to pull everything back to protection of those standards and a recognition of the value of those standards. Why? For the protection of the public. For those individuals that do not speak English, who face, for the first time perhaps, dealing with the police, they may have witnessed a crime, they may be a victim of crime, they may be accused of a crime. For those people who, for the first time, are facing going into court, either as a witness or as an accused, or for those individuals who are facing desperate health situations and they can't speak English. And there have been far too many instances of people dying through poor interpreting. So standards in public service interpreting are absolutely vital. It protects people's lives and it protects their freedom. If you were to look at a very quick chart, you'd say public service interpreting was perceived and still is in some areas as nothing other than an occupation. We need somebody who can speak another. Oh, you'll do, you can speak the language. Why don't you come along? The worst example I know of is a GP practice in the East End of London where a Bengali receptionist told a Bengali mother to bring her 15-year-old son in to a gynecological consultation. It's the worst example I've come across. That's so wrong on just so many ways. Limited regulation, where it's a budding profession. Standards are being set. And if you really needed a start date for our profession, you'd look at 1994, when the National Register was launched under the auspices of a Royal Commission at the request of the judiciary, with Nuffield Foundation money, seed money to launch it. It was the beginning of public service interpreting being seen as a profession. And public interest merits greater regulation. And we've seen that happen, and we'll look at that in as much detail as we can within the time that we have. Self-regulation by the profession, we're certainly knee-deep in that now. If you have a level 6 vocational qualification in public service interpreting and you have 400 hours of experience and you've got the right clearances, then you can voluntarily choose to be self-regulated. And that's been available since 1994. There will come a day when mandatory engagement will happen because of statutory recognition of public service interpreting as a true profession. And that's what we're working to, and the journey to achieve that. Now, some public service organizations are further along that curve, others are further back on the curve. And it's all driven by frameworks. Now, what are these frameworks and how do they affect us? Well, we're going to look at what a framework is. We're going to explore how many there are, and we're going to see how they differ and what this actually means to you. So what are they? Well, frameworks handle the procurement in a particular sector of different things that sector buys, language services being one of them. And it sets standards for the procurement management in what they should be doing to ensure that they are fulfilling the framework's definitions. And that defines how much you earn, your remuneration. It defines terms and conditions. So how many are there? Well, Crown Commercial Services, CCS, is a pretty standard government framework which schools or councils, and indeed historically some police forces have used. Its competitor is the Eastern Shires Purchasing Organisation, the ESPO framework. Then there's a range of sector-specific frameworks in the Ministry of Justice and Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. There's the dynamic purchasing system for the police-approved interpreter and translator scheme. And within the NHS as well, there's a whole range of different frameworks. So these frameworks are important. And what these frameworks do, as we said, is they set standards. They set how a particular public sector organisation should and can go around purchasing that particular standard. Now, ESPO is an interesting one. If you ring ESPO, it has one of these recorded messages where if you're buying furniture, press 1. If you're buying stationery, press 2. And it lists all the way down. And before it gets to language services, it's about item number 96. Item number 96, if you're buying language services, press number 96. That's how ESPO sees language services. It's just that purchasing stationery or purchasing paper clips. And the ESPO framework allows people who have enrolled, not even qualified, but enrolled on a level 1, which is a GCSE course, enrolled on a level 1 course to act as an interpreter. That's the ESPO framework. So where they're starting from is they see interpreting as an occupation way down the scale. And interestingly enough, in my years at the National Register since 2019, I've never been able to have a sit-down meeting or a telephone call or a Zoom call with ESPO management about those issues. Crown Commercial Service is very different. Crown Commercial Services, its last 2 iterations have changed, and actually we're beginning to see their standards increase, not yet to where we want to be, but they're getting better. But let's spend some time thinking about the Ministry of Justice first, shall we? Let's have a look at the Ministry of Justice. Well, there are many here who will know what happened in 2011, 2012, when outsourcing was first introduced by the Ministry of Justice as a reaction to the austerity demands of the then Cameron government following the financial collapse of 2008, 2009. You've got to find ways to save money. You've got to find ways to save money. Contracted out to ALS, a disaster. Contrasted out to Capita TI, a disaster. Still currently the framework with the big word. Outsourcing the engagement function, so therefore the courts and tribunals could no longer needed to have people who were actually doing the engaging, but more than that, actually outsourced the list of interpreters which can be deployed in MOJ settings. Now, the question is why? Well, because it's a phrase I've used before, I will use it again. They have dissolved standards with this framework like a sugar cube in hot tea. You know, we mentioned earlier ESPO. The ESPO framework allowed people who had enrolled on a level 1 course in public service interpreting. Well, this particular framework allowed exactly the same, so that if you'd enrolled on a level 1 course, you could actually go and work as an interpreter in bail hearings, in first hearings, in case management sessions. That thankfully has recently been changed, but that's part of the journey of the MOJ in reacting to lobbying pressure. There was an event in 2019, before I joined the National Register. It was the 25th anniversary event, and the Ministry of Justice came along to present. Now, some of you here I know were there at that event, and the presenters from the MOJ were absolutely mauled, and they were surprised. They were surprised at the negative reaction from everybody who was there at the event. They needed their eyes opening to everything that was wrong with their framework. And for 2 years of lobbying, all the way through to 2021, had many, many meetings. Sadly, they replied by saying that actually our suite of contractual measures are fine. There's no wholesale issues with our service. The same applies for every single bit of everything that we do with our MOJ register, which included people who had enrolled on a level 1 course. So all the work that we put in for 2 years, they threw it away. They said, no, we're not interested in change. Well, we need to reaffirm the importance of professional practitioners in spoken language public sector language services. So we started what was called an MP campaign. We encouraged every single registrant to write a pro forma letter to their MP and get their MP to ask questions about what was going on in public service interpreting in the courts. We then ran an ad campaign with the answers that we got back, comparing what the courts were doing with what the National Register was setting as standards, the profession was setting as standards. Baroness Cousins picked up this banner in the House of Lords. She's the co-chair of the All Parliamentary Party Group on Modern Languages in the Houses of Parliament. Baroness Cousins, with her colleagues, gained a commitment from the Ministry of Justice to an independent review of where they were. So it took a year from when we got that email saying there's nothing wrong, we're not going to do anything. It took a year to get the MOJ to say, actually, we ought to have a look. They released their draft proposal a year later. You'll see some comments soon about this from the Professional Interpreters for Justice consultation. They published their proposed new framework for review in May of 2023. And actually, they've come a long way. There's much to be appreciated, but there's still much to be done. We understand that the ministers in the Ministry of Justice have agreed this new qualification and experience framework. However, what they're saying is that contract tendering process needs to be reviewed, so therefore they're still going to outsource. Cost analysis need to be done. Things might change. However, they've accepted that this new framework that's being suggested is a framework that they should get behind. And the proposed new framework says that the default now is a level 6, so university degree level vocational qualification, typically a DPSI, and 200 hours of evidence experience, which they'd never had before. They didn't have this before. Now, that's a massive shift from the current framework, massive shift. It's raising the bar on the level of qualifications and experience an interpreter will need to have to work in Ministry of Justice settings. Doesn't deliver on everything that we want, that we're lobbying for. We will continue to lobby. The Professional Interpreters for Justice signed off on this in February of last year. This new framework will not come into operation until October 2025. So we've still got some way to go. They're still operating on the old framework. Until then, we're still going to get people who have language-related degrees, language-related diplomas, BA in modern languages, a BA in translation, a degree in linguistics, and a degree in philology. All these people are accepted as interpreters, as well as some lower qualifications. So we're still chipping away at each one of those. We're still encouraging the Ministry of Justice to get to October 2025 and introduce this default of level 6 with 200 hours. Let's look at the police. Well, the police held for the first time ever last April National Police Interpreter Awards on the back of the launch of the police approved interpreter scheme, the PATE scheme, and through the DPS, which is the purchasing system, the dynamic purchasing system that they use. And we have to offer special thanks because clearly this is a recognition that public service interpreting is not just an occupation. Now, there's much about the PATE scheme that we wish to address and change. However, once this scheme was introduced, which is in 2021, we actually got to a situation where at these awards, winners and runners-up had NRPSI numbers, had NRPSI numbers. So it's a recognition within the police awards. And here you've got Baroness Cousins handing over the Simon Cole Award for Excellence in Police Interpreting. It's a recognition that public service interpreting is a profession. Now, we haven't yet got to a stage where the police in every police force has recognised the National Register. But it's recognised the standards. It's recognised the standards that you need to have a level 6 qualification and 400 hours. It hasn't recognised the need that we ought to have independent professional conduct committee and disciplinary committee hearings. We know, of course, that the Metropolitan Police does, and the Metropolitan Police recognises the NRPSI, and the Metropolitan Police makes up a huge proportion of the engagements within the police. Other police forces hopefully will move further along, because we want to ensure that the quality checks and disciplinary processes are run independently. We want any individual public service interpreter to be able to complain without fear or favour if they feel something's going wrong. We want to ensure that there's a clear understanding between the commercial agencies that are being used within the PATE scheme about somebody who's got the qualifications, who's got the experience, and therefore they should be on all the lists across all the country. Rates, terms and conditions need to be addressed. Consistency across the UK is what we're fighting for, and we're fighting for badging with the QR code on the back to ensure transparency. Transparent professional conduct and disciplinary processes also need to be put in. And of course, the MPPV3 vetting has to be mandatory for police. Now, the police have moved a long way. If you think again of that arc, it's not just an occupation. We haven't yet got to mandatory independent regulation, but at least they're taking the default standards of a level 6 qualification and 400 hours of experience. So that's a big shift for the police. Now, I know that I'm going to be running out of time soon. And when talking about the NHS, we could take the rest of today about this, because the NHS has a number of frameworks. There's the North of England Commercial Procurement Collaborative. There's the Shared Business Service Framework. There's the Black Country Framework. There's the NHS Interpretation and Translation Services Framework. There's a Primary Care Guidance Framework. Would you believe, there's one particular framework that says we'll train you for 4 hours and then you can go and work in the NHS. 4 hours training. 4 hours to be a professional public service interpreter in the NHS? I don't think so. And worse than that, if you can read this, it's basically saying that the receptionists in this practice, it's a GP practice, receptionists in this GP practice will no longer act as interpreters. They've never been trained. And therefore, could you please bring along a family member or a friend? And we wonder why people die because of poor interpreting. Don't take my word for it. Take the BBC's word. We'll talk about something about the BBC in a second. And each of these frameworks define it differently. And these allow each and every NHS trust to act the way it wishes to trust, be it a hospital or be it in primary care. So lobbying the NHS, well, we've written goodness knows how many letters to gain interest from government, from shadow ministers, also to the CEO of the NHS. A very tragic death caused a reaction, a death that really caught the imagination actually of this country, a lady giving birth in Gloucester. And we got a reaction. We also use the same technique that we used with the MOJ, where we wrote pro forma letters for NERPSI registrants to pick up and write to their MPs for the MPs to ask questions. And there was an avalanche of reaction on this, with MPs asking whether their constituents were safe if they couldn't speak English when they're in the NHS. There was a lot of that activity through this last year. And there are some NHS guidelines now that actually state that you should first and foremost go to the NRPSI. You should find somebody with a DPSI health as your #1 choice. Should, not must, but it's a move in the right direction. But they're allowed to do what they wish. More follow-up letters, and it's led to an appointment for the first time ever, a lead for language services across the whole of the NHS. There was a whole series of pre-meetings and quite a major meeting on the 9th of November where there were over 40 CEOs of different NHS trusts an amazing BBC programme on the 21st of November on File on 4, which I would encourage you all to actually hear. And we're getting to a place where the NHS are taking language services much more seriously. Now, how far we will go, no idea. But you rest assured the National Register will continue to give voice to standards, to experience and qualifications, to ensure people are professionals who are deployed, to ensure that there's fair remuneration and that terms and conditions are fair. So what do frameworks mean? They set our standards. They set the terms and conditions. They set the remuneration. They set the relationship actually with agencies too, because outsourcing is not going to go away. We might not like it, but it's there. And therefore, we need to work well with agencies. And there's a fantastic working together document put together with the ATC, which is the trade body for agencies, which is well worth reviewing. But we want to see rates which are standard 2. Now, police work at the moment, thanks to the way in which they've embraced all the standards that the National Register fights for, have gone up. Rates in the MOJ absolutely need to change, as do the terms and conditions. And my goodness, 17 pence a minute for a phone call in the NHS, that's definitely got to change. That just shows that with each public sector organisation, it's different. With each public sector organisation, they're travelling on they're travelling on the same arc, but at different speeds. And one of the main roles of the National Register on behalf of every public service interpreter is actually to carry the flag for standards, mandating the use of only those interpreters who are registered and regulated, and ensuring that remuneration is commensurate with the qualifications that you have and the terms and conditions are fair. And that's the way we'll bring people in. There's a continuing increasing need for standards and professionalism in public sector language services. We need to ensure effective regulation of those acting as interpreters, but we need to ensure also that the public sector organisations understand what needs to be done. And in fact, Baroness Cousins only last month in the House of Lords said it's a non-negotiable bottom line must be that only specialist qualified experienced professionals are engaged. And the Bishop of Leeds in the same debate said this is why the National Register is so important, and that was reported in Hansard. I think I'm probably out of time.
No, perfect timing, Mike. Perfect timing.
I could go on for the rest of the day. Why? Because we have a passion for those people that we love who do not speak English. There's someone today in a police custody suite, in a court, or sitting scared in a consulting room, and the interpreter's not good enough, and we need to do something about it. At least with the police, they've accepted level 6 and 400 hours, and they're doing it now. MOJ is not doing it yet, and the NHS has still got a long way to go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, Mike. I have a question for you. Based on your advocacy, you know, you're making great efforts and pushing things forward. How about, you know, is the PSI also contributing to the effort of promoting the acceptance of commercial requirements at a feasible level for SMEs to compete? Otherwise, it's only going to be accessible to large corporations and limited companies chosen by UK authorities. I know there's a certain level of, you know, how much money needs to be turned over before bidding can be done. So I was just wondering if you give a brief response to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the great joys of the role that I have is when lots of organisations have all got the different agendas and they're kind of pulling apart, and yet it's like a Venn diagram. They come together. This bit in the centre we can all agree with. And working with the trade body for agencies, the Association of Translation Companies, which also includes interpreting companies, and agreeing what we really should be lobbying for includes ensuring that there's the right sort of remuneration for the agencies and that it's a fair playing field, that it's not just global organizations which are owned by American venture capitalists that can actually bid. That there should be openings for smaller agencies to be
How can that be implemented? How can that be addressed?
Well, it can be addressed by government changing policies. Now, government will only change policy when there's risk. We had a letter from the government back in 2019, which stated that there's no point in driving for statutory recognition of public service interpreting because there is no appetite in public sector organizations for this, i.e. public sector organizations don't want this because they want to be able to do just what they want to do. So therefore, nice big fat contracts, nice big supplier. It is easy to do with just one agency. Just happens to be this agency may well be owned by a venture capitalist company in the US, right? Government's changing. And indeed, there's going to be a massive change of government, we see, because we're going to have a general election soon.
That's right.
Things are going to change. If government has a desire to encourage small and medium-sized businesses, which we can only hope that our next government will, if government has a desire to protect residents in the UK who don't speak English when they're interfacing with public sector organisations, then government's going to pick up all the lobbying we've been doing and move quicker with it. As to the how, that will come down to months, if not years, of negotiation, but at least we should get that started. What I've found encouraging is that you've had everybody from the Chartered Institute of Linguists, the ITI, plus the regulators, so NERPC and NRCPD for sign language, with associations come together with the industry body for agencies to come up with agreed principles. And we're all lobbying off the same sheet. It's quite different to what it was just some 7 years ago, where everybody was pulling apart. We're actually pulling closer together.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Really appreciate that, and your advocacy efforts really appreciated amongst the community, I'm sure. Thank you. Thanks for your insightful contribution. So now what I'd like to bring everybody's attention to, we've had a lot of people ask about, the schedule of events for today. Well, you just need to head over to conference.linguistcollective.info, and there you'll find a breakdown of all the 3 events we have today with a list of speakers. You can click in to see what time they'll be speaking, what time the events start, and also, you can click into the biographies of our very esteemed speakers. So let me repeat that for you, conference.linguistcollective.info. And we've also had questions around the recordings of this session. Well, the recordings, as I said at the beginning, are for training and internal use. However, selected edited clips will be added to YouTube at a later date, so you'll be able to get some of the highlights from these events. Now, I would like to ask our team to share some slides about LC Agency, because LC Agency believes that every story deserves to be heard and cherished, and strive to provide a service for both established and emerging authors. So if you're an author out there listening or want to become an author, this may be of interest to you. So it's about fostering a diverse literary community. Whether you need book translation, proofreading, or publishing, LC Agency has an array of services to support your book publishing needs. You can find more details on the services page of the website, and that's linguistcollective.info. And as you can see, we have a slide there just covering the services that are offered around publishing. And there's some contact details there, so you can take a screenshot, and feel free to get connected with LC Agency. Okay, so moving on to our next guest, and let me do the introduction by saying language is a code. It's a key to unlocking a world of communication and connection with others, but there can be difficulties for interpreters working in the field. I'd now like to introduce our guest, who will share her thoughts and experiences on this. Welcome, cultural mediator and interpreter, Sana Neji. Hello, Sana. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy and glad to be again here.
Lovely
with
to
all of
have
you.
you.
And I really appreciate all this information that I get, because of course I'm coming from another country and it works in another way. So thank you to all the speakers that they give all this information. It's a really nice space to how can I say, to share. Today I will share my experience, and I just ended my my mission, because I'm supposed to be on sea, but fortunately today I'm so happy at least to be like calm and be focusing, because it was for me a bit tricky if I was on the sea and doing my duty. So actually I living in Italy, and as in the introduction, I mean, I have a different background. I am an interpreter, translator, and culture mediator. I was also a legal advisor in Trieste border with Slovenia for the Ukrainian emergency. I was a legal assessment also with the UNHR. I had a lot of job with many organization, or let me say international organization. And right now I'm working with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent in the emergency of the Mediterranean Sea. So I am on board of the ship of search and rescue area, and in collaboration also with the NGO organization. Of course, today I want to talk about the importance of language, because let me start like, okay, everybody can speak different languages. As in my case, for example, I speak 5 languages, but at least it's not easy to be also a culture mediator, because the language, it's not only translate or interpret what the person or the survivor are talking about. It's matter of a bridge, like took us for the let me say cultural background of people. So in my experience, I worked with different duty. So with the police, as Mike says, and it's not the same way that we are working in the humanity sector. So in this case, I want to flag like the importance of languages to approach for the vulnerability and vulnerable people. Sometimes you are talking with person, and sometimes you have this communication of this connection with people, but it's not easy really to go through the vulnerability. And I want also to say something that maybe we were talking later for the next, for the next step, about the technology that we are using also in order to connect with people, which is for me, and in my case, or in our job, it's not really the good idea, because sometimes having the translation by phone or by Google Translator, or even there is some app that they use in order to connect with people, they are not, it's not easy to connect with them to talk about their vulnerability. And we are talking about people, they have a lot of suffering, a lot of, difficult situation. And let me say, in my case, and in our job, being the first people that they met them after the hell that they was there on, for example, in this case in Libya, it's not easy that people can share everything. And at least having this field, or having this connection with them, to talk with them in their languages and in their culture, help us to make to referral them on shore, and at least help them to we are the first people that we connect with them on the sea after the hell that they saw in Libya. It's really important, the communication, the body communication, the feeling, because people need to trust. People need this kind of how can I say feeling, or I cannot describe this thing, but it's really important to be connected with them, to go through their culture, their emotion, their story, everything. So it's not matter of translating only the language, but it's going through deeply these people and their sufferings. At least you can help them and have the way to help them. And what I want to see, I had an experience with on board that we had some people from Iran, and they are talking Farsi. And unfortunately, on board, no one talk Farsi. So we used let me say, the technology. It wasn't really a good idea, but I realized, like, with our body language, we communicate better, because they can say, they can show that we are interesting to help them, and we try to give them the information as basic as we can. And it was amazing. There you can realize that the importance of languages, the importance of the culture, the importance of the communication between people. And I mean, this is my experience. Like I really realized this, because working onshore, it's not the same thing working on sea. And in the meantime, you are working with survivors, and with many different cultural backgrounds especially. And in the meantime, you are working also to communicate with the Libyan authority. I want to also to add something very important. Like, for example, in my language, native language, which is the Arabic, we do that. We are speak Arabic standard, but Arabic people, we never use the Arabic standard. So we are talking with dialect. And sometimes some people, they are talking Arabic and they want to, for example, to approach to those people. Okay, the survivor can understand them, but they reply in dialect. So this is very important also to mention, that having this dialect of the language can be also classified. Like, okay, I speak Arabic, but which Arabic? Do you speak also the dialect of this this country, or something like that? Because communication also, it's making sure that that person can understand your Arabic as a dialect, or your Arabic as a standard Arabic. But I mean, that's it for now. But I think that if someone have a question about it, I'm really sorry to be so short in it, because
No,
it's supposed
absolutely
to
not.
be
No, it's been really interesting, and I do have a question.
Yes,
Given
please.
your personal experience and background in both translation and humanitarian efforts, how do you approach a language as a tool to identify vulnerabilities, like actually identify them? And you've mentioned like some of the ways to respond, like body language, if you are not familiar with the language, and also looking at dialects, or another way to communicate in that way. So I was just wondering, what are those identifiers for understanding that someone has a vulnerability? Obviously, different spoken languages and so on are pretty obvious, but less obvious vulnerabilities. I was wondering if you could share some of those.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure, the languages, it's important, but even the supervisor, I mean, you are looking for them, and especially if you are on board, there are no big space that they can, for example, be far away from you. So you have to connect, or to build this relationship between people, even for giving, I don't know, you give them the meal for good morning, and good morning, you can start to have some connection. People, sometimes they came just because they trust you. They saw in your face that you are giving them something and you want to help them. So yeah, they approach to you. Or sometimes it's very difficult because they are super close and they are waiting
Sana, I'm so
Yes.
sorry you cut off again. And what I would like to just say is you highlight some really interesting points, and it's about that connectivity. It's about creating that connectedness and trust above all. So yeah, thank you so much. Really,
You are
really
welcome.
grateful for your contribution. Thank you so much today.
Thank you
And
so
you know
much.
what?
Thank
This
you.
is life. We live in a technical era. Things disconnect and we get reconnected. But thank you so much. Really
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Have a nice
Okay.
day.
I just want to communicate to all our audience. One, it's just so great to have you here, and thanks for all the inquiries and everything that are coming in. And I just want to communicate to you that the link for the conference with the schedule, I believe, has been posted in the Q&A section. So if you have a look there, you will be sure to find it. And can I just ask our team, if it's not been posted, can we just post that again, please? Thank you so much. Okay, our next speaker is a highly skilled linguist, audio-visual translator, and literary translator and educator, delving into the critical aspects of working effectively with interpreters. And she'll also address the ethical considerations when working with interpreters, shedding light on the importance of maintaining cultural sensitivity and respect. Welcome, Barbara Rishi. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, thank you very much. It was really, really interesting today. So I'm really glad to see lots of people very passionate about what we're doing. It was really interesting what Sana was saying as humanitarian interpreters. There's lots of things that I was thinking about talking that have been already said. So I'm going to change and improvise a bit and sort of get everything together, what has been said, because we talked a lot about standards of practice. So I took notes of what everyone said. And I would like to say that my presentation was supposed to be about public service interpreting. And when I first arrived here, it was like 7 years ago, I have a degree as a translator and interpreter, and I work as as you said before, as audiovisual translator, as an interpreter, simultaneous interpreter. I was really impressed by the fact that, there were public service interpreters that play a critical role for to create equal access to essential services. So when you don't speak the language of a country you live in, if you can be cut out from lots of essential services. And obviously, public service interpreters help to bridge this gap, linguistic and cultural. However, for this to be an effective service, there needs to be a collaboration and understanding of the role, in collaboration with both service users, so the clients that access services, and service providers, which can be the NHS, it can be schools, it can be, as we seen before, courts. I realized working as a public service interpreter that sometimes the role we have is not very clear, it's not understood. So as Andrea was saying before, it's very important, for example, to introduce ourselves when we start an assignment, because so we set the rules and we sort of clarify what our role is. I also realized that lots of service users, so people who don't speak the language of the country they live in, are not aware of the fact that they can request an interpreter always to access public services. It's their right to have an interpreter. And it's actually much better for them to express their thoughts and their ideas and their concerns if it's medical assignment, if it's a medical meeting, in their own language. I interpret a lot in mental health care. It does make a difference when you can express yourself in your own language rather than in a language you don't feel you're proficient. And also realize that service provider are sometimes not very proactive in offering interpreting services because they have to pay. They don't have rate for qualified interpreters. Mike was saying it's very important to have quality of interpretation because it does impact on the effectiveness of the service delivered. And it also, unfortunately, impact on the life and death of service users, as we've seen before. So standards of practice need to be high. What are the things to take into consideration when we choose a public service interpreter? as we said, as some of you said before, it's very important to identify the language. So as who was saying it? I mean, I think most of you said it. There are languages and there are dialects. So, for example, Sanya was saying in Arab there are different dialects. So when we choose an interpreter, determine the language required or languages required. The interpreter needs to be fluent both in the source and the target language, but also if there is a dialect, it needs to understand the dialect. For example, once I was called, so don't assume that the person nationality or country that of origin means that they speak the language of the country. I was saying I was once called for an interpreting session, and I arrived there and the person spoke Portuguese. I am Italian. I know Spanish and Portuguese, but I don't interpret for Spanish and Portuguese because all the cultural nuances get lost with me. And I said, well, I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened here. How come they called an Italian interpreter for a Portuguese? Then I realized, talking to the service user, that she was born in Italy. Her mum was Italian. So probably what they asked is, where are you born? What's your mother tongue? And she thought, oh, my mum's language is Italian. And then they booked an Italian. So be sure that the language that the service provider, the service user speak is the one you are booking the interpreter for, that the interpreter has experience, and as we said up to now, that they have professional and ethical standards, which means that they maintain confidentiality. There's lots of sensitive issues and lots of data, personal data that are shared, that they're impartial, they don't take sides, so they're not there to advocate, they're there to promote communicative autonomy, which means that everything that is said is translated in the first person so that the voice of the person is stronger as well. And nothing is added, nothing is changed, nothing is omitted. So it's all accurate. When booking an interpreter, there's lots of things that service provider needs to be aware of. As Sue, I think, was saying at the beginning, when and where to meet. I once went into the hospital. It was a huge hospital. There were 3 receptions. Where do I go? There's not explained back well where you need to meet. Sometimes it's a private home. You need to specify if it's a private home so that I know that when I get there, I don't knock on the door, because I know that I don't need to, I can't, for ethical issues, meet the service user before the service provider arrive. Who to contact in case of emergencies, who is the person that we need to report to when we arrive, and any necessary background information are also useful. Brief the interpreter as a service provider when you arrive so that you know a bit of background information, and if there is any specific terminology or jargon that is going to be used during the assignment. Another thing that I noticed when working as an interpreter is that people tend to talk to you. So like instead of talking directly to the person, they tend to talk to you. Can you please explain this to the person? It's not for us to have a relationship directly with the service user, but we sort of make it happen that the service user and the service provider talk to each other directly. That's what is direct communication. And that's why we use the first person. As Sana was saying, there's lots of using of technology, especially after COVID happened. Now everyone is booking interpreters on remotely, on the phone, on the video. And, you know, you can't have a physiotherapy on the phone because it becomes really complicated to explain. So raise your left hand. Is he raising his left leg? Or I don't know, for schools or for NHS, to save money, sometimes they don't take into consideration that actually the persons on the other side might not feel at ease to talk, because it's not very easy to have an appointment, NHS appointment on the phone with an interpreter. Sometimes people might find it really difficult to talk to through an interpreter. So as interpreters, we need to be aware that they need to feel comfortable, because they might be embarrassed or intimidated to express themselves through an interpreter. There's also to keep in mind that some people prefer to have an interpreter same sex, because there might be some conversation around, I don't know, things that they don't want to talk through a man if they're female. Men sometimes prefer to have female as interpreter. And the main thing which I notice sometimes to save money is to get interpreters to use interpreters that are family members or friends or children when in schools, which is like a big no-no for lots of different reasons. First of all, they're not trained interpreter. The professional standards cannot be ensured. They don't abide to a code of ethics that interpreters do. And it can be very traumatic for them to interpret for family members. And for family members, it's very embarrassing to express themselves to a friend or family members, which is more or less what we've been talking about today. So how important it is for interpreters, public service interpreting, I'm talking about, but humanitarian interpreters, Sana was saying, to be recognized as professionals. So to abide to a code of practice. I teach community interpreting up to level 6, and I know that some of my students from level 2 are working. I'm really happy for them, but I feel they're not ready to be out there and work as interpreters with a level 2. And it's unfortunately agencies, because they prefer to spend less money to pay interpreters less, they get people who are not highly qualified, and it's a shame, because then the services are suffering, and our role becomes less important and less recognized as it should be. Another thing that I wanted to add, we said about the technology. I'm just looking at the yes, as Sana was saying, we always we can sometimes deal with very traumatizing assignments, especially you, Sana, I imagine. But even for mental health, we all translate in the first person. So be aware that we can have vicarious trauma. So if we are interpreting for a person using the first person, and some of the content of what we translate can be traumatizing for us, as a service provider, do take some minutes to talk to us after and check if we're okay. That's it. Thank you. I hope I didn't bore you, because lots of things were already said before.
No, Barbara, thank you for highlighting those very important points. We have a question. Actually, we have one of our audience members, Hiba Aldwikat. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Hiba, lovely to have you join us. Basically, you have posed a question that I was going to ask, so I'm going to merge both the questions and put that to Barbara. So Hiba wants to raise and expand on what Sana said around body language. And what she's saying, what she's asking rather, is in terms of translation and interpretation, how can we transfer the meaning of facial expression and body language between different clients, cultures? So body language plays a really important part, as well as, you know, the voice verbal communication, more than likely realize. And the gestures that are common and appropriate in one culture may not be in another. So I was just wondering how interpreters address this. So I was just wondering if you could, you know, expand on this for us.
Yeah, definitely, Hiba. This is a very good question. Yeah. So body language is very important. That's why we don't want to have remote interpreting on the phone, because we cannot see the person. We cannot see how they express their body, their faces as well. As you were saying, Samina, there are cultural differences. So that's why an interpreter needs to be culturally aware. So I know Spanish better than English. I don't work with Spanish because I don't know all the cultural nuances of that language. I don't know all the cultural nuances of South America and Spain. So I translate and interpret just for Italian, because all these cultural nuances or body language things get lost in translation. So the tone of of what is said, the facial expression, we do repeat them as well when we interpret. So if the tone, if she is expressing distress in the tone or in the face, we do express the same in the tone and the face, so that the language sort of fluidly, the body language as well, sort of fluidly pass through. I hope I answered.
Yeah, no, thank you. And yeah, that's really interesting. I have another question based on something that you said, and it's kind of been mentioned throughout the event around agencies employing or, adopting the services of cheap interpreters. Now, it's not always agencies, is it? Because clients can request a certain price point and so on. So I was just wondering what that interconnectivity is, because agencies can't always be blamed for that, surely.
No.
So I was wondering if you could just respond to that.
So I think for vulnerable clients, they need to have access to an interpreter for free. That's my personal opinion. So if a vulnerable client who cannot pay for the services, this should be offered for free. So there should be funding, it should be regulated, it should be understood the importance of having an interpreter in lots of situations to access services. So services should be funded to have access to interpreting services, especially for vulnerable people who cannot pay an interpreter. So for it to be accessible to all. Obviously, this is a profession for us, and it's not a consistent profession. We are almost always casual interpreters. So I teach languages, I teach at the university at the moment, but I always had another job along what I'm doing as an interpreter, because you cannot live as an interpreter full time. So that it needs to be recognized as well. We need to be paid because we are not regulated as interpreters. We need to be paid a right amount of money, which needs to be at least £25 an hour. We need to be paid if we move somewhere from A to B by car. We need to be paid all the expenses as well. So vulnerable people should have access to this service for free. Agencies should try and get funding as much as possible. NHS and police and all the services should get funding for this service, because I think it's crucial for the well-being of people.
I think you make a valid point, but here's the thing. It's about the quality of interpretation being provided as well. And I think that's what I was, that's what was kind of been alluded to throughout the event, is like, yes, people should be paid fair remuneration, as Mike already said, but it's about having that quality of interpretation, and that's what you pay for. But Barbara, thank you so much for the insights.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating to listen to you and all our other speakers so far. Thank you. Now, it's time to hear from our next speaker and honorary chair for this event. She's a barrister and has employed linguists across various jurisdictions in courts and tribunals. She's not only helped to set up Linguist Collective, but chose the name too. The LC agency is grateful to her for her support and solidarity to the linguist community. It's my pleasure to introduce Lynn Townley, who will share her insights on best practices for utilising interpreters in a legal setting. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you, Samina, for that warm welcome, and also thank you to the collective as well. It's been an absolutely fascinating morning with all the different speakers, and very interesting for me as in many ways a spectator to the world of linguists and interpreters, and also as a service user. And what's extremely interesting for me, I've obviously prepared what I wanted to say, and I have got quite strong views on what's happening in the way that interpreters are being used and abused within it's not just within the UK, but I think it's certainly a pan-European thing, and the issues around pay and conditions as well. I was going to cover that, and I was also going to cover issues about quality, and also about using family members as interpreters, and I am going to cover those, but I'm just very interested to see that a number of the speakers have already picked up on those. So these are obviously key issues that a number of people are recognising and bringing to the fore as key issues for interpreters moving forward. And I've made sort of quite detailed notes of what the speakers are saying, because I'll be doing the wrap up at the end of the day. But it seems to me that the key things that are coming out so far have got to do with, first of all, with quality. How do you measure quality? And that's quite difficult if you work internationally or across different jurisdictions. Quality, how do you stop bad practice coming in? Is that within the gift of organisations like LC to stop that, or to report those kind of things? And also the issues around funding, and what sort of remuneration interpreters are prepared to work for. I had some experience in that in the pan-European setting, and it's extremely concerning at the moment that certainly across Europe that there seems to be an expectation almost that interpreters will work at a loss in certain with certain organisations, and that's very concerning. So my experience of working with interpreters personally is all within the justice system. And the problem with the justice system and the NHS, certainly within the UK, is that both organisations are existing on public funding, which has not only been cut just absolutely year on year over the last, probably going on for the last, well, nearly actually my whole life. It's been going on certainly since the late 70s, but very worryingly since 2010, since we went into a government with austerity policies. The cuts from 2010 onwards practically decimated the justice system and certainly affected the NHS. And then we're coming out on the back of COVID. So really, those of us that provide services to the public sector have got an uphill battle to find fair remuneration, because the money just simply isn't there. And that is a challenge, and why it's necessary for groups to join into collectives like Linguist Collective, because individuals can't fight the system on their own. So that's the first thing. We need interpreters. We need to fight back against attitudes. Now, this isn't just affecting interpreters. It's also, I have to say, it's also been commented that judges might be one day taken over by AI intelligence systems as well. But I think what we've seen from the previous speakers is that interpreting is nuanced. It's you know, as the last speaker said, it's interpreting what someone says by their facial expressions, tone of voice, so on. It's not something that AI can replace. And I think that will be a big challenge moving forward into the future, because someone is bound to say, we can actually, you know, we can use Google Translate or whatever, we don't need interpreters, and we will save money. And that's something that has to be really fought against. And secondly, when we're looking at the value of interpreters, we've also had the issue raised today about how often in place of interpreters family members are used. Now, I'm really disappointed to hear that, because back in 2008, when I was working with victims of honour-based violence, and I was speaking on a large conference circuit, which trained a lot of public sector officials over a 2-year period, when I was working for a government organisation. We found back then that one thing that was reported as had happened within social services was that there was reports that a victim had been forced into a marriage and was experiencing quite serious violence at the hands of her husband. And what happened when the social worker went to visit, the husband was used as the interpreter. Now, I don't need to say much more than that, but there's been other things that were raised by our speakers today, similar type issues, and I'm disappointed that, you know, almost 20 years on, that's still happening. Because whenever I told that story at conferences, I got gasps, and I thought, well, things have moved on, but clearly they haven't. And it was Mike Orlov who mentioned about I think it was a 9-year-old boy interpreting for his mother in a gynecological appointment. And I mean, clearly that's a slightly different issue, but equally as traumatic, I would imagine, for both parties involved. And, you know, that is why interpreters need to be made available. Family members can't do it. And also in certain cases, it's not just to do with the trauma, but in certain cases, and I mentioned honor-based violence is one, but there are more, domestic violence, family members may actually not necessarily be on the side, as it were, of the person who needs the interpreting. And actually it can put the person in quite extreme danger as well. Now, I think we're quite pressed for time. So the final thing I just want to mention, and it was brought up by Barbara Rishi as well, about telephone interpreting and what can be lost with not being able to see facial expressions and tones of voice and so on. It's going to be a problem for the future. I just want to point that out to everyone. It's one of the downsides of the lack of funding. One of the things that we have to do now in the justice system, we work online quite a lot of the time over a common video platform. And I think what will happen, again, due to funding, is that online hearings are going to increase, as are online medical consultations and online consultations and things going on in all sectors, where interpreters will be asked to come in and see on a Zoom platform or Teams platform or something similar. So what I would say, I would hope that telephone interpreting is on the way out, because we have other technologies where you can actually see people. I would hope that telephone interpreting will go quite soon, but by way of a warning or a heads up, everyone's going to have to get used to working on video platforms. And actually it's in all of our interests, those of us who want to support the work of the public sector, that we do that, because with the funding crisis that we have, and it looks like that's just simply not going to go away, probably not in our lifetimes, unfortunately, but that might actually be a saving grace for a lot of the services that we provide, that the online platform is actually a cheaper way. And it also cuts out things that have been raised today, the issues with car park and travel expenses and so on. So I think that's where the future lies. And I think we've got to be prepared to work with online video platforms, albeit that they're not the equivalent of face-to-face. Samina, I think my time's up. So those are the main points that I wanted to make. But if you want me to do a wrap up at the end as well, I'll do that. I have a question
for you very quickly, if I may, before we head to your wrap up. It is from Sam Burner, Queensland, Australia, who I hope is still with us. If he's not, he was on Zoom. And what he asks is, what legal options do interpreters have in regard to the non-competition clauses that some agencies put into contracts?
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer, because it will be, I know that Sam's in Australia, it will depend on the jurisdiction, and it will depend essentially on what the applicable laws are for the jurisdiction. And at the end of the day, it's also down to bargaining as well, and whether individual interpreters feel that they can resist signing those clauses. I mean, at the end of the day, any kind of contract is open to negotiation. And that's why I said that's why Linguist Collective formed. It was to give a bargaining power, because the problem is, if you do sign a clause like that, then a company will try and hold you to it. And then if you want to challenge it legally, then it can be quite expensive, and it might involve going to court or tribunal. So at the end of the day, I think it's all a question of contract law, what you agree to, what you sign, and what the bargaining power is. And I think most companies tend to put those clauses in, and at the end of the day, it all depends whether they're fair and reasonable, which I know is a woolly legal answer.
Yeah.
But I think the key is that if interpreters can band together in a way that they have the power not to sign clauses that they feel are unfair and will restrict what they can do in future.
Thank you. And thank you so much for that response. And Sam, I hope that contributes to you and adds value to you. So Lynn, would you like to just do a little wrap up for us before I wrap the whole session?
Yes, so it's been a fascinating morning and very ably and well hosted by you, Samina, as well, if I may say so. You definitely add value yourself just by being here. And in relation to our speakers, again, absolutely fascinating. And the one thing that came out from them all was just the sheer passion that they have for their roles, which unfortunately nowadays is highly lacking. And it's just good to see that the passion can take this profession through. So the things that came out from each of the speakers, we had Sue Leschen first, giving some very useful solutions to the day-to-day working of interpreters, but extremely important things that are often overlooked, the logistics of it, what you need to know and what you need to do to actually turn up and do your job properly. And that's very useful for anyone who wants to go into the area. Then Dr. Andrea Denby, sensitivity and not making assumptions. Again, that's a link that linked all the speakers, extremely important, and it's why we need humans rather than AI. And then Sophia Smith Galley, then again talking about how to win the trust of people. So again, it's the soft skills that you basically you can't have from a machine. Soft skills for interpreters are extremely important. And she also made a very important point about how certainly when she was growing up that the education system wasn't very positive or vocal about the benefits of being from a multilingual household, and also about endangered languages. Again, I hope that's changing. And then another point that I know Mamoon, the founder of Linguist Collective, is very concerned about, as am I. It's endangered languages, and unfortunately the link that languages have to politics, and I have experience of that living in Northern Ireland, and how the use of language can become linked into politics, which is extremely sad. And again, I hope things are moving on. And then Mike Orlov talking about the all-important need for regulation and risk. And clearly I've mentioned, and other speakers have mentioned, the clear risks that comes with interpreting, and the need to get it right. And also that interpreters are not translating machines. They play a very key role and can actually prevent risks and events happening. I think as someone said, within the medical framework, interpreters have prevented deaths. So there's no greater risk than protecting against that. What Mike pointed out was the future challenges and the need to understand what the public sector wants, and also recognition about the value of standards. And I think that's something that is important across the world. And there's also a challenge, obviously, as interpreting is international, but there needs to be some clear link up and commonality of standards. So that's another thing for the future. He also talked about bad practices that I've mentioned in detail. Then we had Sana Neji, again, about trust and connecting and her work with survivors. And finally, Barbara Rishi, who made some fascinating points about cultural sensitivity, again, about the risks of using family members. And pointing out, again, coming back to my point about how AI and the likes cannot ever replace the human interpreter. She talked about the cultural nuances of body language, and how she, in her interpreting, takes care to repeat the tone of voice used and also the facial expressions, because that can be very key in a decision factor. I'm thinking about criminal cases with a jury, and actually how some small thing is interpreted. For example, she said about someone being in fear, and I mean that might be the key. Good interpretation of that might be the key between actually getting a conviction or not, and there's a victim behind that. So hugely important. And she also raised the issue of funding. So I think the things that have come out are recognition of the work that interpreters do, how it links in and is hugely necessary within the main public sectors of health, justice, and education. How they must be properly funded. They must have a bargaining power as well against unfair contracts, as our delegate from Australia raised. So it's quite a challenging area, and in regulation that obviously has to be fit across borders. So regulation, fighting AI, and fighting for terms and conditions are the three key things that I think come from this morning's discussion. So back over to you, Samina.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much for the summation of all the fantastic discussions we've had today. And thank you for the insights into the justice system and highlighting the huge contribution that interpreters make. And thanks for your acknowledgement of me as well. I really appreciate it. Sadly, our time is up. What a wonderful event it has been, providing vital discussion, insights, and solutions to the importance of interpreting and translation. Now, I just want to highlight that LC Agency is not only committed to promoting standards in the UK, but by having events like these, it's promoting professional standards in Europe and globally. And we've got a global audience today, so I hope you can all, appreciate that. And of course, if you're interested in collaborating with LC Agency, either as an institution, interpreter, or translator, or are interested in the services provided, then please do email or call. The contact details are provided on the screen now. And that's not all we have for you. We have more events today. So let me just run over them for you. So don't forget that the next event will begin at 1 p.m. GMT. We would love for you to be there, in which we will delve into the rare subjects of rare and dying languages of the world. And that's been already highlighted in this event about, languages that are on the demise and the problems around that and the impact on humanity. So we'll be delving a little bit deeper into that. And also that will just transition straight into a discussion around multilingual education, the foundation of learning and intergenerational learning. And of course, the issue of AI, artificial intelligence, and the impact on the sector of interpreters has been raised in this event. And at 7:30 p.m. GMT, we'll conclude today's event with this highly topical and controversial subject. It acquires just as much curiosity and excitement as it does controversy. And we've got some speakers who are very versed in AI, and they'll be sharing their thoughts with us. And of course, you can pose your questions to them via the website, via the questions page. Now, we look forward to your company. We really sincerely hope that you'll be joining us in some more compelling discussion at these later events. And we look forward to your company. Really want to hear from you and want you to pose your questions. If you haven't yet registered for these events, head over to the Linguist Collective website to secure your place. And you can have a look at the schedule of events and the fantastic lineup of speakers if you head to conference.linguistcollective.com. Info. If you are unable to join us at the events later today, then not to worry, because we very much look forward to seeing you in 2025 for another event to celebrate International Mother Language Day, details of which will appear on the LC Agency website nearer the time. For now, I'd like to thank all our esteemed speakers and of course to everyone who joined us from around the world. Really appreciate it, and it's been great having your company. See you soon.